You're listening to the Himal Southasian podcast, Partitions of the Heart, Conversations with Harsh Mander. This is Season 1, Muslim Life and Death in Modi's India.
Salam, Namaste, Zindabad, friends. I'm Harsh Mander. Welcome you to one more episode of the series that we're doing discussing the crisis of India's Muslims in the Modi years in India. I feel very privileged to have with us Seema Chishti. Seema Chishti, I think, would be well known to people across South Asia as one of our very respected journalists. She's the editor, one of the editors of The Wire at this point of time, to which many of us turn when we want to make sense of what's happening in our world. Seema writes books. She has a long career and is also somebody who reflects and analyzes the situation. So, Seema, thank you for being with us.
It's a privilege.
So, Seema, let's sort of, in your incarnation as a media person who's really had a front row sort of viewing of India as it transformed quite dramatically. I know that you were there on the day that the Babri Masjid was demolished. So why don't we start with that? Would you tell us the story of what happened?
So it's very interesting that you spoke of one of the premium inspirations for you to start this podcast was to bear witness, as yes. Arundhati Roy told you. And those are exactly the two words that I kind of used to use from that day in 1992 to make sense of it, to understand why I was there, and to just cope with the enormity of the events. Right. You spoke of the transformation of India. As luck would have it, a whole lot of us started our careers when actually India was transforming once after independence. So there is this 1947-50 transformation, and then there is this 90s. Yes. So we actually were birthed in that cauldron of, what is called the 3 M's, very catchy phrase, but Market, Mandal and Mandir, as they like to call it, that there were 3 levels of kind of disruption in Indian society, good, bad and ugly, that were shaking up what was the post-independence sort of stencil, if you like, or the framework. So, but we didn't realize that this change was happening then as we were going through it. So we were literally just bearing witness to a series of tumultuous events, processes and things till we landed in 2014. So I think if we were French, we would probably call it the first, second and the third republic, but I would not go so far. But the other transformation that we have from 2014, which principally is what we're going to discuss today. But as you... 1992, the coming down of the Babri Masjid, what happened before that, the build-up to it, and what happened afterwards really tells a story of an initial break in the India story when the whole idea of Indian nationhood, which meant fundamentally delinking the idea of being Indian from either your religion, the food you eat, the somebody you love, whether you walk on one leg, whether you're one-eyed, whether you're vegetarian, whether you're a Hindu, Muslim, Christian, you're a Kannada speaker, you're a Telugu speaker or a Hindi speaker. It broke from your identity that you were born in, an immutable kind of personal identity, but it thrust you together as an Indian. It was a very powerful idea, coming as it did just 3 years after, 5 years after the World War ended on some horrible European nationalisms. But what I was saying is, coming back to 1992, I think the first trying to assert successfully to a section of vocal India that religion equals nationhood and identity. Yeah. And that is what Babri Masjid did. To rally people to say that some mosque built by an emperor, which is not clear if Mir Baqi built it on the instructions of Emperor Babur, but even if he did, that this mosque stood as an impediment to the idea of India, which was being pushed. Yes. But the thing was that what was happening in 1992 was that people jumping up to bring it down, etc., were the Vandals, who were objecting to a secular, independent idea where everybody belonged, where there was no, it was not a kalank, etc. Everybody had accepted the rights, wrongs, etc., and was working to build a new future. They were the kind of outliers. And what we see in 2014 as opposed to 1992 is that, you know, those who were trying to break that thing down are the establishment. And this came down very clearly in the judgment of the Supreme Court when it ordered that the mandir be built, that while disparaging those who built it down, actually gave full control to those who were trying to break it down. So I think that was a significance of watching 1992 happen, none of which kind of really became clear then. It seemed like a mosque being vandalized, and that was it. But slowly, as things moved on, we were able to piece up the Rath Yatra, understand the story of the Hindu right, which is actually the ultra-right. It's actually equivalent to the far-right parties in Europe today. It's trying to fundamentally rework the whole notion and uproot this idea of composite nationhood that we know as India.
Seema, you know, that's the larger picture. But, you know, just every second Indian is below the age of 25, born long after this happened. And we'll have viewers from different parts of South Asia. Could you describe exactly what happened? That fateful day.
On that fateful day, yeah. I think that's a phrase I used in my very descriptive script for television. I was actually working as a correspondent for Hindustan Times television, and we had gone there with the TV crew, and we were there for 2 days prior to that. And we were told that there will be some sanketik construction, i.e. some symbolic construction of a mandir will happen. Around that, there was this particular area, around the area where the Babri Masjid stood. A certain area was cut out by the court as a place where that symbolic construction would happen. So all eyes were there on that. But we suddenly found the crowds becoming quite unmanageable, and the police doing nothing. There was just ropes and a baton which would not be used. So clearly it was like the swelling of a lot of people, almost 100,000 you could tell. Loads had gathered some 500 meters away in a Ramkatha Kunj, which is called that. And this build-up had been happening for days and weeks, and it was allowed to happen. On that morning, suddenly at 12 o'clock, the police decamped. The central forces, who were under the control of Delhi, which was headed by a different party, the Congress party at that time, Mr. Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister, also left the venue exactly at that time at around noon. What was instructions coming from a public address system suddenly changed to a Ramdhun, and the media is beaten up. Our cameras are put out of action. All of us were beaten back at that point and pushed out, and people rush in and start demolishing the mosque. The demolition continues till about 5:30, well after sunset. And even after the entire demolition happened, etc., media is beaten up, pushed away in several areas, under some control. But it is clear that there's nobody calling this out or stopping it, even after the 3 drones are brought down by about 5:30 or 6. We hear on our little radio sets, we could only hear state radio, which told us that, Kalyan Singh has resigned after that. So under another dispensation, the central dispensation, a makeshift temple was built, and it was only on the 8th morning that the central security forces come in, beat back everybody and take control. But by then a new reality has been established, the mosque has been pulled down, and a makeshift temple has been put in place. So that, in short, is what happened. It was accompanied by violence. There was a degree of choreography. So when the courts and the judges say that there was no, I don't know what conspiracy they were looking for, it's very evident in footage captured by our camera teams, on others, on photographs that another journalist called Praveen Jain had taken of practice happening in Madhya Pradesh and neighboring areas about how to pull down this very, hard to pull down structure built in 1528, 26. How to pull it down without any use of explosives, because we couldn't hear explosives. But what was the engineering used to pull all that down? Wow. So it was clearly a case of, but it was still a case of some people on the outside who exercised enough control of the imagination of the people and had the gumption to do it, assisted by a state government which went back on its promises to protect the constitution to the Supreme Court, but very much also under cover of the regime that was at the center at the time.
Many of us, including myself, regard that day as being, after Gandhiji's assassination, probably the most tragic day in the journey of our republic. Do you agree with that?
Actually, Advani agreed with you too till some time back, and he said that it was a very disappointing day and it was a sad day. Atal Bihari Vajpayee said the same thing. So it was pretty much what you're saying was pretty much the consensus argument for anybody who believed in the India story and dream of India as a robust plural democracy. And completely agree with you.
But Mr. Advani had led the whole movement.
He had, but he was forced to capitulate. That was the power of some degree of public opinion and outrage that did follow after 1992. So you didn't have 2014 immediately after 1992. In fact, if I remember correctly, the BJP, there were a series of dismissals of state governments that happened. The BJP was in power in 4 North Indian states and it lost power in all when it returned. So, it didn't exactly...
When we look back at the crime of the demolition, don't you think giving time for the construction of a temple that changed the status quo, wasn't that also a crime? And how did that happen?
Yes, it was. And it kind of suggested that the government at the centre, led by Mr. Narasimha Rao, clearly was influential parts of the government were in sync with what was happening. They either did it with a bid to diffuse tension, as is sometimes argued in some memoirs and series of interviews and all done later, or there was no understanding that this would lead to this, or they were fully in sync and complicit and wanted this to happen.
Because until the makeshift temple came, it was feasible to imagine the reconstruction of the mosque at that site.
In fact, Narasimha Rao goes on air on that day because the riots break out and it's a very dark day. Even the night is darker than other nights because there's violence across India, in Hyderabad, in Bombay, and of course it triggers off the January riots in Bombay, but in other cities as well. So at that time, Narasimha Rao does say on Doordarshan that, and I heard that myself, that he will rebuild the mosque. But after that, there was just no mention of
once
that.
They allowed the building of a temple at that site, that possibility seemed to have disappeared.
I must say that possibility was still kind of there till even after the High Court verdict of September 30, 2010, prior to the Supreme Court verdict. We all thought that there would be a story which will involve a mosque and a temple.
Yes.
So to that extent was there, but no doubt you're right. They're not rebuilding the Babri Mosque, but a symbolic mosque and temple would exist side by side.
Side by side, next to the temple.
Next to the temple.
What that day has done to the idea of India and to the practice of how we live our lives is something that I'll come to. But what's happened to the media? I think symbolically the image of media persons wanting to tell the truth and being beaten back, is extraordinary. It's inspiring.
It's a tribute to the media.
It's a tribute.
That you needed to be beaten up to be kept quiet.
To be kept quiet. It was inspiring. I fast forward to Gujarat 2002. And I look back now and I thought that was as dark as India could become. But I still, it was a time when the media still told the story. They were on your side. In fact, the article that I wrote, before I quit the civil service and try my beloved country, I thought it would be a voice in the wilderness, but the Times of India reached out to me. We'd like to carry it, etc. We had a Supreme Court that was active, etc., etc. So the media had still survived with a conscience through 2002. Today, nobody's being beaten. No one's being
to be shut up.
To be shut up. Far from being shut up, they become cheerleaders. If they were cheerleaders of the ruling regime, that would be sort of odious enough. But they're much more than that. They're cheerleaders of hate, channel after channel. How did this transformation happen?
So there are, some of us are sitting down and are actually thinking about, talking about this in a way to make the world understand, because Indian media stood behind this garb of being this vibrant media, which has escaped emergency and is now very diverse, etc. But behind the story of 500 channels, thousands of other newspapers, magazines, is a single pro-hate narrative. So I think so it was not as if 2014 media was in perfect shape. The media must acknowledge that. You had paid news, you had the crass commercialization of media, what media analysts have called the 3 Cs: cricket, crime, cinema, obsessed. media. So it had already gone down the way of commoditification of news post-90s, and it was kind of at its weakest. It had lost its economic model. Then with the coming
But it was still not a purveyor of hate.
it was not a purveyor of hate. I think what happens, you have to look at ownership patterns, how they were and how they changed. Who were the original supporters of the BJP? That even when the BJP is out of power, media gives it disproportionate kind of weight. There are the whole coming back of Mr. Modi into the limelight starts with industrialists at number one, with them Vibrant Gujarat calling him prime ministerial material. Next is media. So you have, pullouts by India Today.
And the industrialists were actually first Tata before anybody else.
With the nano, yes, but even Mr. Ambani sort of said at that first summit that he'd be an excellent prime minister. So I think then big industry starts owning media. So right now you have Mr. Ambani owning about 60% of media. You have Adani who now runs NDTV, and these are only two. I don't want even to take their names because they're only two of the largest friends of Mr. Modi who run this. Others are also run on similar. So there's no idea of this person who's running this, doing a public good. And now, of course, when the government has gone after Reporters Collective, they've said, what kind of public good does your investigative journalism do? So I think the role of media as a very important part of democracy, as its independence is not something you can order on Amazon and I don't want it, I want this color. No. It's an essential good for the entire operating system of a democracy to take place. So when media gets captured either by way of becoming a commodity or it becomes a purveyor of hate because that's a ruling party regime, and they want to help them transform the common sense of the nation, they're damaging democracy. So I think the whole a weak media on grounds of economy, on grounds of conviction, on grounds of what it was, then was weaponized with great ease, and a lot of this weaponization has been willing. So to say that everybody's been bullied because they're scared is wrong, censorship is wrong. It can't happen without genuine complicity and you are interested in the ideals of what is being projected. Some of our colleagues and friends, and they've done good reports for News Laundry and for Reuters as well, surveys on who is telling the stories, who is in media, what is the caste, class, composition of who is telling stories. And it's very clear if you look at that the majority of India by way of caste, religion, class is completely unrepresented. So the same lot of people who are cheerleading this regime or these set of ideas, which is what we're talking about, is also telling the stories and is the media.
So, Seema, I still wanted to push a little more on it. Do you think this was this a plan, or did it just happen? I mean, this transformation, this dramatic transformation, was it part of the RSS-led transformation of this country? The recognition that the media plays a very crucial role. Therefore, big industry who are on the side of the regime and the Hindu right take ownership, or was there a systematic plan when we analyze the history? It's a difficult question, I know, but
I would be inclined to wane and say yes. So there may not have been a perfect plan being executed, but the recognition that media helps, assists, and it's important is very critical in their understanding of, nobody should report about it. And now, as I say, even a Facebook can be you can go to court, you can be pulled up in the new IT rules. That gives you a template on what the plan is. The plan is to completely collect all this and to shut down all information. And then you build your alternate narrative of what's happening, and everything's okay. There's no problem. Everything's fine. I would be tempted to think that there's a plan. There may not be a really written down plan, though I'm not too sure about that because everything else is scripted pretty much from the 1920s to what we're seeing unfold now. So media as a source of, prachar, prasar, they've always had kind of media organs that have been very active and doing their job.
But Seema, I am older than you, of course, and my coming of age was really during the time of the emergency and the battles against it, etc. And there were, with all that happened there was a glorious sort of tradition of resistance. The blank
the
editorials and many such. Why don't we see what has happened to the moral center of India's media? I mean, these are I know these are sort of almost unfair questions.
No, these are very good questions. Is that the answers are horrible, but I'll have to give them. I think one thing is we must examine the outrage, the media outrage on emergency. If you look at the majority of the papers, and I flipped through those files, they're quite tame. They accept censorship, right? And a lot of those media houses were RSS kind of backed. They were in cahoots with what was happening. So it's all very well to be very critical of the Congress when it's in power. Who's being criticized? The RSS is pretty much central to leading that campaign, whether it is, leading lights of the RSS, former MPs and MLAs are on this side.
And that is the time when the RSS came back
so
from the
blank
market.
editorials, etc. and all were also coming by people who had who said that, and meetings were held in their offices to plan for, getting this woman out of power and getting themselves relieved. So I think we'll have to be a little skeptical about what that was. No doubt it's great, to have a blank editorial, and media was no doubt put down, and there were inexcusable things that happened under the first emergency that this country faced. But the resistance was led very much by business houses and newspaper houses, which were very much on a particular political side.
Okay. So, no, but I'm still asking, what's happened to our collective moral center? I'm saying our sort of, I do many other things, but I've written columns, 15 years for one, 15 years for another. All of them suddenly said, no, coarseness of the discourse. That's another thing. I mean, just the aesthetic of it, apart from the ethics, it's just so repugnant. The kind of language that is used.
So the coarseness of the discourse, I think, started a lot of this technology, as you know, also is kind of pushed by militaries. There's large military experimenting happening. So this whole business of drone attacks is actually also preceded by kids having games where you kill, and it's okay to kill. It's okay to kill you, and you kill some, like I'm sitting next to you and you're killing me whom. So it's different from the chess goatees. There's something very real about that kind of virtual killing that's established, and I think that fundamentally shifts a lot of things.
It's a sort of crushing of your
instincts
of humanism.
Yes,
I think.
Yes, and I think there's a fundamental challenge we face that way, that the entire system, the pool that we're swimming in, has become pretty poisoned.
So Seema, I mean, I worry about, the anti-Muslim, frankly anti-Muslim, Islamophobic discourse that has become so mainstream in mainstream media. How much of it do you believe is because of profits or advancement of your career, and how much of it is because of conviction? And and I'm asking this question because I studied Nazi Germany, and I was deeply worried because there again the university, the media, the intellectual, and speaking to historians. Did people really believe? Are the people who are spreading anti-Muslim hate people who actually have who have this hate prejudice inside them, or are they doing this as career? I don't know which is more frightening, but. Yeah.
No, I think the career thing will be a little less frightening, but I think unfortunately we've come to the pass where they either think it doesn't matter because they either don't, there's so much ghettoization that they don't see, or they've been dehumanized, or they buy into the script. So I think anybody who, and there are a lot of people who come and say, our job's at stake and therefore we're doing this. I don't buy that beyond a certain level.
I don't buy it at all.
I don't, and there is such a sinister project of the creation of certain news agencies, of their ability to craft a discourse in a particularly nasty way, and reflections of that become very clear if you look at what Hindi cinema is doing. Hindi cinema, because it fictionalizes the characters at play, you'll either be a tawaif or you'll be like a beauteous Muslim woman kind. So all of that I see as part of a larger media piece, and all of it suggests full complicity. And even if you are sitting on a 10,000 crore business and you're scared, Frankly, I don't have time for that kind of
I
being
don't
scared
care.
of the terror. I don't care.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it comes from, and also what is media, Harsh? They are from the same societal pool, which is giving rise to the sort of mobs or this talk of thug jihad, this jihad, that jihad, etc. So like even some parties in how the ruling party in Delhi behaved over the Tablighi Jamaat thing. And I know for a fact, I followed that story closely. I wrote something on Caravan on the whole Tabligh thing. Just before that, there was a concerted attempt by media to say that there was no COVID in India. It was only the Tabligh people who'd spread it. Now think of how much time that actually lost you in terms of just getting your head around it and getting your act together.
The absurdity of that prejudice.
Yes.
That one small building in Delhi.
Yeah, at a time of a global pandemic, and that was 2 months after the UN had declared it a global pandemic. So, which is another part which we can come to later about how this anti-Muslim hate and all damages India. Fundamentally, it corrodes India. But I think till then, the fact of going after roti makers, going after people who participate in melas, fairs, temple journeys, kumbh, etc., is all part of a much larger orchestration where the media, whoever is doing it, is fully complicit. We did a small exercise of going to such as looking at this January 2024 inauguration of the temple, which Mr. Modi himself did, that versus what was being said by the same business houses who've not changed hands, right? They have the same ownership. What they did in 1992 and what they did then. It was dramatically different. Okay. And in fact, this is something which a young media analyst called Vineet Kumar calls error 404 journalism, that your own journalism goes missing. So India today will call it, it's the darkest day, but right now it's like the Ram buses are touring. Indian Express, which made big ha-ha about it then just said January 22, 2024, stripping it of context and everything that it stood for. So Times of India behaved almost identically in that, and these are read by thousands of people, and they are not seen as government handouts. These are like so-called independent. This is not Doordarshan. This is independent media. So I think the responsibility squarely lies with them. There is, this, we are very scared. Our university, which we run on the side, or our rice mill that we run on the side, or our mining company we run on the side will be, that's part of the story. Otherwise, they're completely complicit, and even the editors cannot say that we are not responsible because we're only fulfilling the remit of the boss, the babu.
I agree with you, and I'm in my as somebody who writes op-eds, people were saying we are trying to help you by censoring your piece.
Yeah, that's the new kind of Goebbelsian line.
So I'm saying I don't want that help.
Certain bylines have been withheld, particularly say after Kashmir, and you spook and gaslight the people that you will not write anything on this. So how was Kashmir reported? Just after 2019, it took Kashmir was shut down, no doubt. It took a long time later for some independent media houses, etc., with very little voice, very few resources, and very little autonomy. Really, the government can come and swoop down on anyone, shut down. They've shut down Vickerton right now. They took down the Caravan story. So they have enormous powers to shut down stuff. So I think the so-called legacy media or the mainstream media has a lot to answer for.
So Seema, just in your own personal journey, and since you've written about it as well, it's interesting that your parents were from different faiths, and in your own marriage, you're also from different faiths. When your parents talk about, they must have faced some opposition. You might have faced some opposition, and what is happening in the name of love jihad today? How would you talk about changing India through these three?
That's a very nice question, and I think that's the easiest way to understand it. So my parents got married in 1966, and they faced a lot of opposition, but the opposition is faced through some quiet families who are a little hassled about it, etc., or by some neighbors, something. The state is not doing it, or state-run kind of militias or laws aren't. What is protecting them is the Civil Marriage Act. Or me and my late husband, when we're getting married, the law protects us from all other lumpat calls that we get, "Arey ladki dhoond li, we'll help you find a boy." That's the critical difference.
But Seema, I'm just still saying that when your parents got married, even the societal or family opposition, when you got married, had it changed by then?
I think because we were just so forthright. My husband was a well-known public figure, and we were just so forthright in who we were at that time that maybe we didn't really see that. But I know that some people still got scandalized that, because all, people who even claim to be secular, etc., do not marry. Marriage is the thing that decides that you marry within your caste, you marry as per certain circumscribed thing. That's what settles how you can go forward. So yeah, I think it changed a bit, but I'd like to point this out, that by the time that, say, I got married, as opposed to my parents getting married, there were a whole lot of crazy changes to the law had taken place. The BJP is not in power, they're way, it's not that those times.
What were the changes in law that had happened?
Things like making it difficult, trying to get an NOC, obscuring the law, how long will you put up the notice? And these are things that can really scare young couples, so you're made to feel like you're doing something wrong. Why are the cops getting involved? Why do you need an NOC from the family? It was not so bad, but that journey had started of making it difficult, that, we are not very happy with this marriage. A marriage, even though between adults, should have parental consent, which means that you're basically letting conservative, awful ideas into the lives of the future, really. And it's completely unconstitutional, illegal, and that is something we saw play out in this famous Kerala case, where they went after the doctor, to say, and she converted before, she didn't get to get married, she'd already converted, and then she got married. But the whole thing was taken up on a war footing. The Supreme Court is questioning a young woman about her choices, which prima facie was unconstitutional, I thought.
This whole mythology of love jihad, I mean, it's hard to choose between, the Thuk and the Tablighi Jamaat spreading COVID, etc. But still this idea that good-looking Muslim men are somehow chosen to train to attract Hindu girls who have nothing in their heads. I mean, just the absurdity and the misogyny of this.
The misogyny, but the academic Charu Gupta has kind of documented what was happening in the 90s, in 1920s as well, that this whole bundling of your cattle and your women will be taken away. So this was also experienced and felt by the Muslim side as well, that there was great anxiety about, the woman's womb being captured, because that's the way through which you practice your exclusion. That you see, once the woman has autonomy and she's moving, then my entire life goes for a six, because my whole life is run by the whole pure race, this whole pure person,
And the woman is my property.
And the woman is my property.
Yes.
So, and she's also my property to propagate, to give birth to more and more children who are of a particular type. I don't want like half Christian, half Muslim, half Jewish children. That corrupts my whole argument. It corrupts the future and it corrupts my people. So I think, as you very rightly said, that between all these land jihad, thuk jihad, etc., I think the most damning is the so-called love jihad thing, and it's equivalent to the Nuremberg laws. So there's precedence. It's almost like a cut and paste of trying to say that if you're a Jew, say it loudly, and do not come here. You will, any mixing of Aryan blood is violative, and that's where these 11 states that have gone ahead and put this, and it's actually, though it's not surprising, but it's very saddening that the Supreme Court has not ruled these ultra vires.
Absolutely.
Because these laws coming up and saying this is a direct violation of Article 14, Article 19, and all possible articles they say that there are our fundamental rights. I mean, what's your business what two adults do?
The two women, there were two women in the drafting committee of our constitution, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur and Hansa Mehta. I'm told that one fundamental right that they wanted to introduce was the right to choose your spouse and consent to the choice of your spouse, and it was overruled by all the men the foresight that they had in understanding where India could go on this question. But I think the idea of the sexual, the oppressed group is actually a dangerous sexual predator. You see it in Jim Crow's America, in African Americans.
Their virility, they're attractive.
Most of the lynching in America was in the claim that they were sexually, with Dalits.
Coming for,
with Dalits and with Muslims. So I think isn't that also?
Oh yes, it is, and also a very important part is that something as nebulous as the so-called love jihad law allows you to go after young Muslim men.
Yes.
So that whole story of the black men, the prison population of the US at a certain time, you can find parallels here about what's going on. So people who have then no recourse, going to the courts is very tough business, as you and I know, that it'll be difficult to find a lawyer. To be able to knock on the courts is itself a great privilege. But your ability to put away a whole lot of Muslim men, there's also this thing that is examined and a lot of leaders or those who believe in this love jihad thing advocate that you go and get Muslim women. So there are those kind of cases of get Muslim women and bring them into the fold, and that's how you increase our lot. So the whole thing, misogyny, a convenient way of legal, now lawful. Lawful is not necessarily constitutional now, but it is a way through which you can lawfully choose to pick up a whole and victimize a whole kind of segment of young Muslim men and scare them. And this is the same thing which happens with the triple talaq law. It's, I mean, only if a Muslim man gets up and just says talaq, 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 words which are like saying apple, 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 because they've been ruled as not having any power, any consequences. But there'll be a case against a Muslim man. So if a Hindu or a Jewish man, a criminal case. So this way, you've criminalized a civil matter, is what? And it sits in the court and it's allowed to be accepted as law. So just that hangs as a Damocles sword over...
Very specifically against
Muslim men.
You know, I often think that if abandoning your spouse is a criminal act, if we decide as a country that is, a Hindu man can leave his wife and say talaq once or 5 times
or not say anything at all.
Not at all.
Yes.
I mean, like the Prime Minister, I mean, it's not a crime.
But you know, in his case, I think because the wife does not speak of it as an abandonment, so...
Yeah, it's extraordinary that you have these...
Yeah, the amazing double standards.
Double standard. Seema, you know, talking about India today and the crisis, how deep do you believe is the crisis of India's Muslims? Many people feel that I am exaggerating, but I see, you know, like the Nuremberg laws, like this business about, you know, boycotting livelihoods, the
brown shirts.
And the whole role of the RSS. Do we see India as in early stages of what can ultimately be a genocidal project?
I hope you're exaggerating. So I am in... You know, as a fellow journalist, has given me a very good exit line for this, that I'm a journalist, so I can only tell you about what's happening in some trends. I'm not here, I'm not a soothsayer, so I can't predict what's happening. So I will stay away from that, because for me, that also paralyzes the discussion. But we should be very clear-eyed about the trends that we see and which way it could go.
So are there trends? So I'm talking about the present. Are there trends which are similar to genocidal projects, early stages?
I think they are, and I think there are people who are better scholars or, you know, viewers of this, and they've put the score at some number, this at 8.
Genocide Watch, of which actually I'm on the advisory group, actually sees
signs of that.
Most
signs of that. And also, I think where we should worry is that India has seen a bloody partition not too far back in the past. It's, you know, that exchange of populations. So we can be prone to that kind of idea. So we should definitely be cautioned against it. So not look at it as a manual, but be cautioned against it. There's nothing to say that it will not end up in the worst possible scenario if we don't call out and pull back from there soon enough.
So let me argue my case a little more. Hannah Arendt talks about citizenship as the right to have rights. I believe that India's Muslims are already have been pushed into a zone where they don't have the right to have rights. I can call for your genocide and nothing will happen to me. I might become a minister tomorrow. I can decide to bulldoze your home with no law and nothing happens. I mean, the recent case, I just can't believe that somebody said he overheard a 15-year-old boy cheering for the Pakistani team. And the boy is put into an observation home. The parents are arrested, charged with creating hatred in another community, and their homes are demolished. I mean, for me, this is well advanced into a genocidal project.
No, as I said that you're right, but I think, you know, as we have set such a high bar for genocide, being the Holocaust and the concentration camps, so maybe history may say that people like me were deluded into thinking that that will never happen, because that's such a high bar. But
I'm not claiming that
what you're saying
200
is
million people are going to be killed like 6 million Jews were killed. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that once you place an entire community beyond the right to have rights, then we're emerging into a situation which is much closer to the Rohingya situation.
we are emerging, and no, I'm glad you brought that up, because I often think of the Rohingya situation and also Sri Lanka in terms of the Tamils, what they did as in the early, the 650s, 60s, the taking the rights away, and then you depeopleize them, then it becomes very easy to talk about their decimation. Termites, Dimak hai, ye hai, wo hai, etc. Ghuspaitiye and all that. So I think that all those pieces are there, but maybe it's my innate kind of belief,
Optimism.
hope, maybe the O word as well, that I don't want to think that this is going to go down that way because of a centuries old kind of compact that there is no India if there is no everybody coming together. This is not, sabhi ka khoon shamil hai yahan ki mitti mein, and that will innately and assert itself. One can see that sometimes in the kind of results that you had. There was nobody, it seemed as if it was an unstoppable juggernaut. But Mr. Modi's party is a minority party in office right now, etc. So I'm not saying that we go by that, but something tells me that we may not be. India loves being an exception as well to all possible rules.
But Seema, as again, your primary identity perhaps as a media person, how would you describe the landscape of the minds and hearts of disadvantaged populations of the Muslim community in India today?
I think the demographic plays an important role. When I speak to kind of older people there, there's a sense of the possible, maybe I represent that graphic, as you said, the median age of India is 29 today, so I'm way off that, I'm twice that. So the age, there is a little more hope and optimism, if you like, for people who've seen better times. But I worry about a young, burgeoning demographic, because we are in that demographic, whatever, a bulge moment, about those who don't see recourse, who don't see the fact that they'll get jobs, they will get justice, or they'll get a hearing. And those who've grown up without any shared memories, without any shared things, there are no role models put out. There's there's a pushing down of role models. There are no soaring films, stories, people to look up to, etc. So I really worry about that that landscape. I think that landscape, if there was a smart government or people in power, they'd like to give them hope, because that's the way you look for a new tomorrow, and that's how you do Viksit Bharat. But the minute you're going to do a significant section of the 200 million people, and others also, maybe Dalits as well, disadvantaged Dalits and all as well, who do not feel part of this Hindutva project, I see not a great story. For the older people, they see possibilities, they look at the whole electoral situation, and they think that something can be worked out. But that may not be the case with the youngsters.
Yeah, for young people, I mean, young people, in college today, many of them are children of the Babri Masjid demolition. I mean, their parents would be often people who either supported the whole movement and so on. So I feel among a lot of young people, the middle class who are not Muslim, they've learned hate a lot in their living rooms, from their parents, and that's terrifying as well. I am even more than what is happening to India's Muslims, I'm worried about what's happening to India's Hindus, caste Hindus.
I think the radicalization of a Hindutva mind is a very scary project. India should be worried about that.
That is what is most terrifying, and you're seeing violence, prejudice has become so much part of everyday life.
More than that, I think it's what you said, living rooms. I think if you look at it, things like this, the WhatsApp message, the editorials in the newspapers, television channels, what your leaders are saying before. Mujra, Musalman, Bhains, etc. Top leadership is saying, I'm not even talking about Adityanath, I'm talking about the Prime Minister before elections. I think when all that is in sync and chiming together, that's what worries me. Living rooms were earlier also, some of them were in praise of Godse. In some homes, you had that. But there were other checks and balances and counters. Now with everybody in together on that common sense that you were speaking of a little while ago, I think that creation of that mood and that hate cesspool which we're always swimming in, I think that's a matter of great concern. And you're right, the radicalized kind of a Hindutva mind which believes in hate. I mean, I always like quoting Patel's letter to the RSS Sarsangchalak after the ban, and he said that you do good for Hindus, that's good. Even if you do just good for Hindus, we want want that. But your good for Hindus cannot only be an attack on Muslims.
Yes.
So if you're going to start defining your your fealty to or your loyalty to the Hindu cause by being anti-Muslim,
Yes.
then that's no good for the community doing it too. And it's awful that when we look at the South Asian template which India defied, you look at Pakistan, there are more people dying there saying their namaz. And these are not Ahmadis. You have Shia Sunnis dying. So it ultimately will come after the Pakistani Sunni. There'll be trouble for the Sri Lankan Sinhalese as well. So this does nobody any good. But unfortunately, it's too late by the time we can cite out instances of that. So I think if India continues to be on this hate as a project by its ruling party and this common sense, it will ultimately come to destroy the India. And I must quote a young Muslim friend of mine who put it very well. He said, देखिए, हम ही खत्म करने के चक्कर में इतना ज़बरदस्त मुल्क खराब कर रहे हैं ये लोग. And that was such a prescient thing that you want to just go after us and you're destroying the whole idea of India. So I don't think there's any survival for the idea of India if you have these hate-filled minds then being at play.
Seema, I was just reading a report this morning that a study has shown that the greatest amount of hate propaganda emerges out of this country. There was another study which showed that anti-Palestinian hate, most of it, the greatest part is constructed in this country. Now, what does this say about what we are becoming as a people?
It says rotten things, and this Palestinian hate is actually, I was glad that happened, but it woke this up to the world. So I think the Indian internet, the Hindutva trolls, when they go after women, they go after who they are married to, who they are likely to get married to, their sexuality, their looks, etc. They reveal themselves for all the hate that they're carrying as their politics. What Savarkar said, that it is about kind of militarizing Hindu society and making you feel as if you're in a state of war, which is exact opposite, the absolute opposite of what Gandhi advocated, about conciliation and bringing people together in peace as a weapon, satyagraha as a weapon. So I think I'm happy that all this comes out, because then it is no longer a story that this government would want to keep on the inside while it projects like some big greatness outside. So the fact that it comes out just shows you as to how it probably sees itself also as Israel. But it sees itself in those Zionist
But what is terrifying
paradigms.
is that when you come out nakedly with hate, as in the recent elections, as we saw in India, and we saw Trump, and we've seen Netanyahu, and far from revulsion, it is the adoring sort of populations have grown further.
So I think that's a question that confronts the world now with Trump and his also winning the popular vote, though not by a resounding majority. It's a slender win, but his controlling the Congress and the Republicans and the far right kind of move in Europe should concern us all.
Yes.
Because at the heart of it are ideals that unite them, about exclusive ethnic nationalism and extreme antipathy to anybody who's not like us, and to go after the other, Islamophobe for hate, and then going after them. Actually, Islamophobia, and also okaying violent acts. It's okay to have mob violence and all that, which does take you back to the 30s. So somebody was just quoting Eric Hobsbawm from his memoirs, that he writes about what it was living in the 30s in Berlin, that you knew you were heading towards a car crash, but what do you do? So sometimes, of course, one gets that feeling that maybe the world does do this again, not, history sometimes continues to repeat itself, not as a farce, but as a tragedy, even the second time around, to paraphrase Karl Marx. Yeah. But I hope it's a farce this time around and not a double tragedy, as all signs of being in like a 30s situation appear on, all the lights, all alarms should be flashing red.
So, Seema, you've said this before, that you're not sure we are in that car which is heading for a crash.
No, I'm sure that the car's like out of control and is speeding, but I don't know if he'll crash, and I hope we won't.
Okay. Where do you see hope, and what are your fears?
The fears are what we've discussed in detail at length, that people who seem to have the levers of power, and I have no ways of saying that they will not have those levers of power in the near future, are infused with an ideology that charges them, which they openly believe is about hate. It's premised on hate and not even love of the Hindus. It's premised on the hate of Muslims, on uneven, of just taking out all wrinkles from this beautiful multicolored thing that we know as India and making it all one color. That's the fear that remains, that they are fundamentally in power in all ways, economically, socially, and politically in power. And what gives me hope is the fact that change has always been an unpopular proposition. It has always been brought about by people who are seen in a minority, who are seen as nuts, who are seen as people who are going against the tide. We have to just be patient and keep pushing our hands to the wheel that will make this spin in another way.
But, we can't just hope that history will
Not
take
hope.
us.
No. So my optimism...
What are we doing and what should we be doing?
I think whatever you can do should be done. If there is a school teacher who can talk good sense, teach people correctly, they should continue to do that. I think to just stay on the crease, to use a bad cricketing metaphor, is important. To do whatever you do and to think big, to think that you matter. Because I also draw hope from the fact that they go after one small person for a small act of something. Some comedian, something, not Ranveer Allahabadia, but Kunal Kamra can't do a show. So they are threatened by laughter, they are threatened by comedians, satire, so continue doing it. If you're threatened by a movie, you're threatened by a news item, you're threatened by a small bunch of journalists, you're threatened by small people, small if you know what I mean, people like you, yourselves, other people, colleagues who are doing this, then there must be great power in what we're doing, because it has moral power, it has the ability to tell other people. Basically, it's why are they doing that to you? It is like kill the rooster to scare the monkey, that everybody else goes running if they think that you've been sorted and dealt with. So I think our job is to just continue doing whatever we do with bigger force, and to maybe actually even being optimistic is not such a bad thing, because if it gets me down, then till the day that I'm alive, I'll work towards a better India, and an India I must de-link nostalgia from this. This is not about going back to an India. It's about building a new India, which is premised on the best principles on which our country was founded. So I think we'll just have to have the balls, the gall, and the belief and the audacity to say it and continue doing whatever we do.
Yeah, Seema, I mean, your friends have told me the number of cases, for instance, that I'm being faced with. They ask me, but why is the regime frightened of you? And I start laughing. I mean, why should they be frightened of me? But there clearly is something that we seem to be doing right in this resistance. So, my last question, are there enough of us who are doing this?
Great question. The Election Commission has become an imperfect medium. Otherwise, I would have relied on them to do surveys, etc. But
are there enough of that school teacher that you spoke about?
Well, let's put it this way. The ones who really want hate and all, looking at a random mix of the World Values Survey, Pew, etc. and all that, I think those who really push for hate are very few.
Yeah.
So, I mean, who said, was it Susan Sontag who said it? That, the ones who really want hate and the ones who really want change, they're just 10% each. The struggle is for those in between. So we should not think that all of India is bigoted, etc. Which is not to say that we're not on a dangerous path. Yes. But I think that there are enough of us, if we want, we can. So that's not an excuse for us. There are enough of us who can do this, and to convince the others to not do it. So I think those who really want the hate project to succeed are few. But are there enough who can kind of galvanize the others to push them out of the discourse and push them out of holding premium levers of power? I think that will be our challenge in the next 10 or 20 years. And also to not lose faith or sight in just 5 years or 10 years. This is a long project. Even of those who are in power, who are pushing the hate project, if they were to just leave for Vanuatu or Congo tomorrow, even then you'd have a hard time of depoisoning the river ahead of us. So I think, and the minute you think of it as a long game, it just gets easier to do the right thing.
I must say I completely share your sense of hope. I believe that rich and privileged upper caste Indians have let this country down profoundly.
Yeah, the elite.
The elite. But I believe that working class Indians still live the India that we believe in. And it is in their acts of resistance by the way they live their lives, by the relationships they make, that we'll still save India.
Yeah, there's just one thought that I want. There's a great, very good book by Sudha Pai called Everyday Communalism, when she tries to characterize what's happening in UP, which is the largest state of India, which is what the chief minister's politics did. India's togetherness was an everyday fact. You're trading with a Brahmin trader, your karigar is a Muslim, or somebody's a Christian, your accountant is a Jew, whatever, that kind of a thing. But what they did was introduce hate into everydayness. So you never had a time when you would talk about after death hatred, You said, no, sabka malik ek, we all meet there. But you had a Kabristan, Shamshan debate, a crematorium and a graveyard debate on, you try to divide. In everyday communalism is what the book does. I think we'll just have to reverse that, and the everyday togetherness, and it's a battle we fight every day in the way we conduct ourselves, in the way we also de-violinize the society, because it's also because the acceptance of violence is so high that women being raped, killed, pushed in a gunny bag, But that all comes to haunt.
Or urinating on a tribal man's
Urinating on a tribal man, getting him to drink your piss, that utter disregard for others as human beings, all that is part of the same kind of a problem.
Absolutely.
Riding at the moment in anti-Muslim kind of hate syndrome. So what we're facing in India is a much graver kind of a monster. It's dressed up in what they think is a popular anti-Muslim trope, but it actually guises a much deeper, violent attempt to recast India. So if we can somehow make it about everyday acts and things and recognition of, as you said, of the warp and weft and the weave that we are, that it would, that's the only way in which India can emerge, and South Asia can too, because South Asians look at India as a beacon, and with India going down in the default South Asian mode, as I like to call it, is very worrying for countries around us. We lose respect, and we also kind of, the center of gravity sinks. That has consequences.
Thank you so much, Seema. I mean, one of the books I wrote, I called it Partitions of the Heart. I said that there's one partition on the land and we saw what it has done to us. We're seeing a million partitions of the heart. And I think the resistance has to be each of us fighting each of these partitions. And I believe there are enough of us who are still doing it. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for asking me, Harsh.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Partitions of the Heart. You can find more Himal podcasts like the South Asia Review of Books and State of South Asia on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Support Himal's independent journalism by becoming a Himal patron today. We'll be back soon with another great conversation. See you then.